Apply. Imagine a world where towering castles cast long shadows over villages drowning in fear, where the clang of steel echoed through narrow streets. Apply, and whispers of plague sent chills through every home. A time when knights rode into battles under banners of blood, and legends were born in the darkness of despair. Apply. Welcome to the Dark Ages, a period of mystery, survival, and unbelievable stories that still haunt us today. This was an era where life was fragile, death was constant. Apply, and yet hope, courage, and legends rose from the ashes of suffering. The Black Death, even the name itself sounds like something out of a dark legend whispered around a fire. Apply. But this was no myth, it was real, a nightmare that swept across Europe in the mid-14th century with such fury that it would change the course of human history forever. Apply. Imagine walking through a bustling medieval town, narrow cobblestone streets filled with the chatter of merchants, the ladder of children, and the toll of church bells. Life, Apply, though harsh and uncertain, still carried a rhythm, and then suddenly it all stopped. The plague arrived silently, hidden in the bellies of trading ships. Rats carried fleas, Apply, and fleas carried death. At first no one understood. People began coughing, swelling with painful black boils on their skin. Apply, their fevers rising so fast it seemed like fire consumed them from within. The illness was merciless. Entire families perished within days. Apply. The bustling town squares turned into places of terror, filled not with voices of trade, but with cries of grief and the sound of church bells tolling endlessly for the dead. Apply. Historians believe the Black Death killed nearly 25 to 50 million people in Europe, almost half the population. Imagine half the people, gone. Apply. Streets once full of life became empty, houses stood abandoned, and fields lay untended as workers and farmers succumbed. Entire villages vanished. Apply. Wiped out so completely that only ruins and silence remained to tell their story. Fear consumed everyone. Neighbors stopped speaking, parents abandoned children. Apply, and communities tore themselves apart in search of someone to blame. Some thought the plague was God's punishment for sins. Others believed dark forces or poisoned wells were to blame. Apply. Spread faster than the disease itself. In many towns, groups of outsiders, travelers, and minorities were brutally accused of causing the illness. Apply, paying with their lives for something no one truly understood. Yet amid this unimaginable despair, strange stories were born. Some said that if you carried flowers in your pockets, Apply, the sweet scent would ward off the sickness. Doctors dressed in long black robes and terrifying bird, like masks stuffed with herbs, hoping to protect themselves. Apply. These plague doctors have since become one of the most haunting symbols of the Middle Ages, their eerie figures stalking through the chaos. The plague did not discriminate. Apply. It took peasants and nobles alike, kings, priests, merchants, children. None were spared. Whole monasteries were wiped out. Apply. Libraries of knowledge lost forever as monks who kept ancient texts succumbed to the sickness. Trade collapsed, harvest rotted, and famine followed death like a shadow. But strangely, Apply, out of this catastrophe came transformation. With so many lives lost, the rigid structure of medieval society began to shift. Serfs and peasants, once tied to the land, Apply, suddenly found their labor in high demand. Survivors could demand better wages and more freedom, leading to the slow unraveling of feudalism. The Black Death, as horrifying as it was, Apply, helped reshape Europe's social and economic future. Apply. Legends say that some people walked through entire villages where not a single soul was left alive. The only sounds were the crows circling above and the creak of doors swinging open in the wind. Apply. For those who lived through it, the world must have felt like it was ending. The Black Death was more than a plague. Apply. It was a wall of darkness that split history in two, before and after. Life would never be the same again. The echoes of its terror still linger, etched into folklore, art, Apply, and the very bones of Europe's cities. A chilling reminder of how fragile life once was and how quickly death could sweep across an entire world. Apply. Step beyond the towering stone walls of a medieval castle, and you will find yourself in a world that feels both enchanting and suffocating. To the people of the Dark Ages, Apply, these massive fortresses were not only symbols of power but lifelines of survival. From the outside, castles seemed unbreakable, stone giants with towers stretching into the sky. Apply. Walls thick enough to resist battering rams and moats filled with cold, murky water that promised death to intruders. They were built to inspire awe, to strike fear into enemies. Apply, and to remind peasants of the ruler's unshakable authority. Yet inside, life was far from the fairy tale we often imagine. Apply. Daily existence within those walls was a mixture of privilege and hardship. Apply. Lords and ladies might have worn rich fabrics and dined at long banquet tables under glittering chandeliers of candlelight, but even they were not free from discomfort. Apply. The drafty stone corridors were icy in winter and stifling in summer. Fires roared in grand hearths, but the warmth rarely reached the upper chambers. Apply, where nights could be so cold that even layers of wool and fur offered little relief. Imagine sleeping beneath tapestries meant not just for decoration, but for insulation. Apply, while the wind howled through arrow slits carved in the walls. For servants, squires, and guards, the castle was both home and workplace. Every morning began before dawn. Apply, the clang of iron gates opening, the stomping of boots in the courtyard, and the clatter of pots in the kitchen signaling the start of another grueling day. Water had to be hauled. Apply, fires stoked, food prepared, weapons sharpened, horses groomed. Every task was essential because within the fortress walls, self-sufficiency was survival. During times of siege, apply. When enemies surrounded the castle, these routines became lifelines. Wells dug deep into the earth provided water, and underground storage chambers held salted meat, grain. Apply, and all to outlast the enemy's patience. But despite the grandeur, castles were not immune to the harsh realities of the age. Disease spread quickly in cramped quarters. Apply, and sanitation was primitive at best. Chamber pots were emptied into cesspits or thrown from windows into the moats below. Apply, giving the air around the castle a stench that clung to everything. The lower halls echoed with the sounds of livestock. Apply, because animals were often sheltered inside the walls for protection. The mixture of hay, dung, smoke, and sweat filled the nostrils of everyone who lived there. Apply, reminding them constantly that survival carried its own price. For children born in castles, life was a blend of strict training and fleeting joy. Apply. Sons of nobles were raised to wield swords and ride horses, learning the art of war as soon as they could walk. Daughters were taught to manage households, weave, apply, and prepare for political marriages that would secure alliances. Games were played in courtyards, songs echoed from the halls, and troubadours sometimes brought laughter with their tales. Apply, but behind the merriment was a constant awareness of duty and responsibility. When danger struck, the castle transformed from a home into a battlefield. Guards stood on high ramparts. Apply, bows ready, scanning the horizon for enemies. The thunder of hooves approaching could send waves of fear through every chamber. Families huddled together. Apply, praying as flaming arrows rained down, while soldiers poured boiling oil or hurled stones from the battlements above. The castle's defenses gave hope, but sieges could last months. Apply, testing endurance and morale. Hunger gnawed at even the wealthiest families, and whispers of betrayal often spread faster than fire. Yet, within the harshness of this life, Apply, legends were born. Knights swore oaths of loyalty in great halls, feasts celebrated victories, and stories of bravery echoed against stone walls lit by torches. Apply, to live inside a castle was to live within a world of paradox, luxury and suffering, security and fear, splendor and filth. It was a place where every stone held stories of survival. Apply, sacrifice and power. The castles of medieval Europe still stand today, their walls scarred by centuries, their towers casting shadows across green valleys. Apply, they remain silent witnesses to a time when life inside was not just about protection or privilege. Apply, but about enduring the trials of a world where danger was always waiting just beyond the gates. Apply, the image of a knight has always shimmered with romance, gallant figures clad in shining armor, rescuing maidens, protecting the weak, and upholding honor under a code of noble chivalry. Apply, but the reality of knights in the Dark Ages was far more complex, a tangled blend of brutal warriors and revered heroes. To become a knight was not simply to don armor. Apply, it was to step into a world defined by loyalty, violence, and a constant test of courage. The journey began in childhood at the age of 7. Apply, noble boys were sent away from their families to serve as pages in the households of powerful lords. They polished weapons, cared for horses, and observed the rituals of court. Apply, it was a life of discipline, training, and obedience. At 14, they became squires, learning the art of war firsthand, riding into battle at their master's side, carrying shields, apply, and sharpening blades smeared with blood. It was a dangerous apprenticeship where one mistake could mean death. And if they proved themselves worthy, will apply, they would one day kneel before their lord, sword laid upon their shoulder, and rise as a knight. Armor, though often romanticized, was far from comfortable. Apply, imagine wearing a suit of steel weighing up to 60 pounds, clanking with every movement, suffocating under the summer sun. Beneath it, apply, layers of padded cloth absorbed sweat and slowed exhaustion, but offered little relief. Helmets muffled sound, narrowed vision, and turned each breath into a stifling gasp. Apply, yet knights endured it all, because armor was not just protection, it was identity, a visible mark of status and power. And then came the battles. Apply. Knights were trained for the brutal reality of war, sword against sword, shields splintering under the force of blows, lances shattering in violent crashes of jests. Apply, blood stained the fields where honor was tested. Despite the lofty ideals of chivalry, courage, loyalty, and mercy, knights could be ruthless. Villages were plundered. Apply, enemies slain without hesitation, and loyalty to lords often outweighed mercy to the innocent. Chivalry was as much an aspiration as it was a reality. Apply, and for every knight remembered as noble, there were many more whose names are lost in the carnage of battle. Yet knights were more than warriors. They were symbols. Apply. Poets and troubadours sang of their bravery, spinning tales of noble quests and impossible love. Legends of knights riding to save kingdoms or embarking on holy journeys. Apply. Such as the quest for the Holy Grail grew out of this culture. These stories transformed men of flesh and blood into icons of honor and romance, larger than life. Apply. The knight became not only a soldier but also a myth. Jousting tournaments added to this legend. These grand spectacles were not just entertainment, but rehearsals for war. Apply. Crowds gathered as knights thundered across tilting yards, lances poised to unseat one another in a display of strength and skill. Victors gained fame, honor, apply, and sometimes the favor of ladies who tossed them silk tokens as signs of admiration. Yet beneath the pageantry was danger. Broken bones, crushed ribs, and fatal wounds were common. Apply. Knighthood was also deeply bound to faith. Knights swore oaths to God as well as to their lords, often viewing their battles as holy duty. The Crusades, apply, with their calls to reclaim sacred lands, turned knights into soldiers of religion, carrying the cross on their shields as they marched thousands of miles into foreign deserts. For many, apply, these wars promised glory and salvation. For others, they brought only hardship, suffering, and disillusionment. Apply. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia came long ships that cut through the waves like knives of shadow, their dragon-headed prows striking fear into all who saw them. Apply. These were the Vikings, warriors, raiders, traders, and explorers whose sudden invasions shook the very foundations of medieval Europe. To the people of the Dark Ages, apply. The sight of a sail upon the horizon often meant doom. Bells tolled frantically, villagers fled into the woods, and prayers rose desperately into the sky. Apply, because when the Vikings arrived, fire and blood soon followed. The invasions began in the late 8th century when sleek longships swept onto the shores of England, Ireland, and France. Apply. They came without warning, striking monasteries and villages, plundering treasures, and leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. Monasteries were special targets, for they held gold. Apply. Silver and holy relics guarded only by men of prayer. Imagine monks chanting in candlelit chapels when suddenly the doors burst open in steel. Clad strangers stormed inside. Apply. Swords gleaming, voices roaring in a language that sounded like thunder. To the terrified victims, it felt as though demons had come to life. Apply. Yet the Vikings were more than ruthless raiders. Their skill in shipbuilding gave them unmatched power. Longships were fast, flexible, apply, and able to travel not only across the sea but also up narrow rivers, slipping deep into the heart of Europe where no one expected them. They appeared as if from nowhere, apply, striking towns hundreds of miles inland, seizing wealth and vanishing before local armies could even organize a defense. Apply. It was this unpredictability that earned them their terrifying reputation, a storm that could strike anywhere at any time. But behind the terror lay a fascinating culture. Apply. The Vikings were fierce in battle, yes, but they were also skilled traders and settlers. Apply. They established routes that stretched from the coasts of North America to the deserts of the Middle East, carrying furs, iron, amber, and slaves in exchange for silk, spices, apply, and silver. They founded settlements in England, Ireland, and even as far as Russia, weaving themselves into the very fabric of the lands they once terrorized. Apply. Cities like Dublin were born from Viking roots, while their influence reached Constantinople. Apply. Where some served as the famed Varangian Guard, elite warriors sworn to protect the Byzantine emperor. Their invasions forced kingdoms to adapt. Apply. England built fortified towns called burhs. France constructed walls around vulnerable villages, and rulers paid enormous sums of silver, known as dangel, to buy temporary peace. Apply. The Vikings, cunning as ever, often accepted the tribute only to return months later demanding more. This cycle of fear and payment reshaped medieval politics and economies. Apply, leaving scars and innovations alike. And yet, for all their violence, the Vikings carried with them stories that still ignite the imagination. Their mythology, tales of Odin, Thor, apply, and Loki traveled alongside their raids, seeping into the lands they conquered. Some European legends absorbed their influence, weaving Norse gods and sagas into local folklore. Apply. Even their burial traditions, from burning ships to treasure-filled graves, apply, left behind haunting reminders of a people who lived and died with a belief in eternal battle and glorious afterlives. By the time the Viking Age began to fade in the 11th century, apply, their legacy had already taken root. They were no longer just raiders, but rulers, having carved out kingdoms and shaped the maps of Europe. Their descendants would become kings, dukes, apply, and conquerors, blending with the very societies they once attacked. The terror of their sails gave way to respect for their courage and endurance. Apply, leaving behind a legend both feared and admired. For those who lived in the Dark Ages, the word Viking was a promise of fire, chaos, and destruction. But today, apply, it is a name wrapped in fascination, and echo the time when dragon ships ruled the seas and the world trembled before the storm that came from the north. Apply. In the shadows of the Dark Ages, where fear and uncertainty haunted every corner of life, legends were born. They rose from whispers in taverns, from the chants of monks. Apply. From the imaginations of peasants staring into the firelight. In a world where the line between reality and myth was blurred, tales of dragons, witches, enchanted relics. Apply. And ghostly nights spread like wildfire. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were survival. They gave people a way to understand the unexplainable. Apply. To find meaning in an age ruled by darkness. Imagine a villager walking home through the mist, carrying only a flickering lantern, the woods pressed in close. Apply. Every branch like a claw reaching out from the night. To them, the rustle of leaves might not just be the wind, but the footsteps of a spirit, a wandering soul forever cursed. Apply. The unknown was terrifying, and out of that fear, myths of witches and demons grew. Women accused of practicing dark magic were believed to summon storms, curse crops, and bring plague. Apply. Whether true or not, such beliefs could condemn someone to the flames, turning rumor into execution. Dragons, too, lived in the imagination of the medieval mind. Enormous. Apply. Fire-breathing beasts said to guard treasures deep in the mountains or sleep beneath ruined castles. Knights who sought glory often became the heroes of these tales. Apply. Battling monsters not just of flesh and scale, but of human fear itself. Each victory added to the legend of knighthood, making warriors larger than life. To common people, apply. Such stories symbolized hope that evil, no matter how terrifying, could be conquered. Then there were the relics, objects said to hold divine power. The Holy Grail. Apply. The lance that pierced Chryssite's side, pieces of the true cross. These artifacts fueled quests that blended faith and adventure. Knights embarked on pilgrimages across dangerous lands. Apply. Seeking treasures that promised salvation for themselves and their people. Whether these relics truly existed mattered less than the belief in their power. Apply. In a world plagued by war and famine, belief itself could bring courage. Ghostly tales also found their place in the medieval imagination. Fallen knights said to rise from their graves. Apply. Spectral armies marching across the sky before great battles and haunted castles where the cries of the dead echoed through stone corridors. For those living in the Dark Ages, apply. Where death was constant and the afterlife an ever-present thought, these stories were not far-fetched. They were warnings. Apply. Reminders that the world of the living and the world of the dead were never truly separate. Legends didn't just terrify, they inspired. Robin Hood, though perhaps more myth than man, apply. Became the symbol of justice, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table embodied ideals of honor, loyalty, apply, and equality at a time when corruption and war were rampant. These tales gave people something to believe in, a vision of what humanity could be, even if reality often fell short. Apply. But the true power of these legends lay in their endurance. They passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, growing with each retelling. A dragon might grow larger. Apply. A witch more wicked, a knight more heroic. They became threads woven into the very fabric of European culture, shaping not only stories but identities. Even today, apply. Echoes of medieval legends linger in our books, films, and imaginations, proving that in an age of darkness, stories can shine brighter than any torch. In the end, apply. The legends of the Dark Ages were more than just tales. They were walls of mystery built to shield fragile human hearts from the chaos of reality. Apply. They were the voices of a time when life was harsh, death was near, and yet in the face of despair, people dared to dream of monsters, heroes, and wonders beyond the ordinary world.